Prepare to be captivated by the business story of the week, hosted by me, Shaheen Shan. Join us on a journey through the twists and turns of entrepreneurial triumphs and setbacks. Immerse yourself in the narrative and witness the magic that turns dreams into reality. This is Business Story of the Week.
And welcome back, folks. Welcome back to Business Story of the Week. My name is Joshua, and I here am today, like all the other days, bringing you guys the best, the brightest, bringing you guys a wealth of knowledge, not just in the entrepreneurial, not just in the business world, but today in the academic world as well, in the world of the academe. And we have quite our guest who speaks about a topic that resonates with me right now, and I am sure would resonate with all our audience and listeners out there as well. Adam Galinsky is a vice dean and professor at Columbia Business School. He has published more than 300 scientific articles, co-authored a best-selling book titled Friend and Foe, and presented a TED Talk, which is titled How to Speak Up for Yourself, which has garnered more than 7.5 million views up on YouTube on the TED Talk page. Professor Galinsky's expertise extends beyond academia. He is actively engaged in consulting and advising on various organizations, leaderships, diversity, decision-making strategies. His impact on impactful research and thought leadership have earned him recognition as a leading authority in the fields of management and social psychology. I am quite excited to have him on today. Professor Adam, thank you for being on the show. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Professor, I know you just finished the class right before the show. Thank you for being on here, of course. We'll give you all the spotlight as much as you can. We can hear the raspy voice, but again, thank you so much for being on here. But Professor, before we really start getting into it, I like to always start with this question and open with this question. You're probably gonna get. I'll have the editor edit this out, but you're probably gonna get some internet issues going on my end. So I'll just keep talking, and then it loads. It catches up anyway. All right.
Yeah.
Yes. So before we really get into this, what is the story of Adam Galinsky? Where did it all begin? Right? Like, where did you know? Like, since childhood, did you know? Like, oh, I'm gonna teach leadership when I grow up. I'm gonna write 300 scientific articles, and then throughout your journey, any pivotal moments where you realize that one day I'm gonna have a TED Talk video with 8 million views. What happened along the way, Professor? What is the story of Professor Adam Galinsky?
Well, if we go way back in time, the first part of the story starts when I was a surprise. So my parents did not know they were having twins until I was born. My twin brother was about 50% larger than I was. And we came out of the womb. He came out, and then they're like, I think there's another one up there. And then my doctor reached in and found me. And my brother is bigger and faster than I was, et cetera. And so I think from very early on, I was interested in sort of like how we navigate a world that is a complex world of cooperation and competition that led to the book Friend and Foe, I think, from the very early beginning. I think I've always been fascinated with understanding human nature. Like, why do people do the things that they do? Mm-hmm. And I think that's really from I can just think back in high school, I can think back in college, all those aspects. But I will tell you a very quick story about that. So
please.
I first thought that I wanted to be a social political theorist, right? And I started doing that in college. I went to Harvard for undergrad. I was a social studies major, and I just kept looking longingly at the psychology courses. And one day I called my parents and I said, would you hate me if I switched my major to psychology? And they said, no, it would be great. And so I ended up switching my major 3 weeks into the semester, which was kind of crazy thing to do. Changed all my classes and then becoming a psychology major. But I thought I wanted to be a clinical psychologist, which my father
Okay.
was.
Uh-huh.
And after college, I got a job at Mass General Hospital doing clinical psychology work. And about 89 days into my employment, my director called me in the office and he fired me.
Oh.
He told me I was not, you know, that he didn't think that I was, the right person for the job. And
Mm-hmm,
as you can
mm-hmm.
imagine, that was incredibly, humiliating and shame-inducing experience. And I
Of
remember being
course,
on
of
the bus
course.
going home in the back of the bus and crying. Um, but I think it was also very instructive, which is that I didn't actually want to be a clinical psychologist. And I had never even taken abnormal psych in college. I'd never even taken the most basic clinical psych class when I was an undergrad. But I had
Oh
taken
wow.
social psych and I'd taken advanced social psych
Okay.
and I'd taken
Okay.
groups and teams. And so very quickly I realized
Hmm.
that what I really loved was social psychology. And so
There you
that's what I
go.
ended up getting to do a research assistant with and getting to work with a professor at Harvard and then going on to get a PhD in social psych. And so I think it was really just sort of understanding, um, you know, uh, not abnormal psychology, but normal psychology is what really fascinated me.
And then you quickly, I imagine you quickly got deep into this once you realized that the social aspect of the psychology is what you are looking for. How did you, or when did you see yourselves transitioning into like um, teaching this in let's call it a corporate nature, like when you teach
Yeah.
organizations and leadership? Was there a point or a pivot where you saw the opportunity? Oh wow, I can actually involve myself with organizations. What happened there?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with like the type of research that I was really interested in, and so in
Hmm.
graduate school, I became very interested in thinking about decision making and how we make better decisions, and I also started
Hmm.
thinking a little bit about how we negotiate and we solve complex conflicts, and so I would say the first expertise that I really had was, and where the core of my research was at the very beginning of my career was on negotiations. And
Okay.
I did some of the most seminal work studying when and why it's an advantage or a disadvantage for making a first offer in negotiation. And so I've done,
Right.
you know, dozens of studies with collaborators all across the world and published, more than a dozen scientific papers on the psychology around and the economics really of making first offers. So that was sort of my first love, was sort of understanding, uh, both when it becomes advantage to move first and how to move first,
Yes. Yes.
and when it becomes a disadvantage to move first. And then from there, I started to become very interested in some of the dynamics in psychology, in negotiations that revolve
Hmm.
around power. And so then I started getting really interested in the psychological study of leadership and power and status, and how those and how the structure of teams really affect the type of outcomes that they have.
And this is a very crucial, right? Leadership. You mentioned that leadership outcomes and how these affect teams, how these affect decision makings, and it's such a crucial aspect of any group, any team, any organization, any
Yeah.
corporation. Um, and I imagine that going through this transition and understanding that okay, I can involve myself with leaderships and all these people. I imagine that the culmination of this was one of your books, or your previous book. You have a new one coming out right now, but the previous book is titled "How to Speak Up for Yourself," and it aligns with what you just said to us. It's like, how to speak up yourself. You actually talk about this also in your book. Rather, is Friend and Foe. That's your first book,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you talk about it in your TEDx, your first TEDx is called or titled "How to Speak Up for Yourself," which has garnered almost 8 million views. Professor Adam, talk to us a bit about that. What is your book about, and what
Yeah.
was something unique that you talked about in your TEDx, and why it gained 8 million views?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think that sometimes you ask, "What's the story of Adam Galinsky?" And I'll tell you, I think one of the things that really drives me is I just get fascinated by everything in the world, right? And so trying to understand what negotiations I think really teaches us is that every decision that we make is not a very simple decision of should I cooperate or should I compete, right? There's a tension, a fundamental tension between cooperation and competition. One of the stories I like to tell is like when my wife and I decided to get married. We
Right.
decided to get married, 100-person wedding in another state, and
Wow.
should be the happiest day of her life.
Yes.
And we weren't speaking to each other. And so the question is like, preparing for the wedding. And the question is,
Yes.
what's going on? Well, what's going on is that she had a vision in her head of the ideal wedding. I had a
Yes, of
vision in my
course.
head of the ideal wedding, and those visions were competing with each other. So
Right.
even though a wedding is supposed to be literally the most cooperative thing you can do in the world, there's also still an element of competition that's going on in that. And so
Right.
I think in that case, my training in negotiations was incredibly helpful. We
There
sat
you go.
down, my wife and I said, okay, I think, we discovered what was going on. It was these competing visions. And I said, what's one thing that you have to have at the wedding that I might find ridiculous, but is really important to you? And she
Okay.
had lived in Japan. She wanted oshibori towels to be scented and
Okay.
chilled and scented and given in between the ceremony and the reception.
Wow.
So we go
Wow.
down
Okay.
to Tribeca. We buy all of these towels. We bring them down to North
Right.
Carolina for the wedding.
Right.
And she's like, okay, what's something that's really important to you? Right. And so I wanted my brother's band to play at the wedding, my brother and his high school friends he used to play with. And so that's a great example of friend and foe. It's a great example of that tension between cooperation and competition and how critical and important it is to navigate that. And similarly, right, when we speak up, sometimes we're speaking up on behalf of other people, and we're advocating for them, and we're cooperating with them, and sometimes we're challenging people with our voice. And the question is, how can we do that most effectively? How can we express our interest, make our opinions heard, make our interest identified to other people so that we can get what we need in life, but
Right.
without creating too much resistance in other
There
people.
you go.
And so I think a lot of, I talked about first offers and negotiations, right? It's the same thing. It's like, how are we presenting ourselves? Ultimately, we want to get what we need for ourselves. And in
Okay.
many cases, we also want to make sure that other people get what they need for themselves. And so one of the questions is, how are we presenting the information in a
Yes.
way that's going to be most digestible to other people? How can we speak up for ourselves with creating the least amount of resistance?
Wow, that's so interesting because I think it's not just in teams or in organizations. It's also in life in general. You gave us that
Yeah,
example in your marriage, like the day where you are supposed to be, or the entire process where you're supposed to be the most united ever, and you guys are actually
yeah,
in tension. And you talk about negotiations and how do you speak up for these negotiations and communicating what you feel, communicating what you want in a practical manner without creating that tension. Professor Adam, talk to us a bit about that. I want advice on that basically, and I wouldn't be alone in the audience and listeners right now and say like what would be one practical advice and one practical strategy from your TEDx that of course we're going to invite our audience and listeners to listen, to go back to and listen. But tell us, give us something, one thing that anyone could use to deliver, speak up for themselves without creating that what you call tension.
yeah. I think that one of the single most powerful tools that we have in trying to, let's say, it's in negotiations, it's with kids, it's with in any life, is that we're gonna be able to be more ambitious
Hmm.
and feel more confident, sort of pushing a little bit of the limit when we're presenting information as options. And
Right.
so So I'll give you just, the example I give in the TED Talk, which I think is the simplest version of it, which is, a car salesman says to a potential customer, I can give you this car for $35,000 and a
Mm-hmm.
5-year warranty, or $34,000 and a 3-year warranty. Now, for the car dealer, those are equivalent to them. They're completely equal because each year warranty is worth $500 to them. So
Okay.
3-year warranty at 34,000 or 5-year warranty at 35,000. But what it's great by offering the choice, then you allow the customer to decide how much is that value to them? Do they want the extra 2 years
Right.
and pay a little more or not? And
Right.
so, we see this with kids, getting kids dressed. They refuse to get dressed. Give them an option: this shirt or that shirt. Right? Then, okay,
Mm-hmm.
that shirt. This pant or
Mm-hmm.
that pant. Okay, that pant. And so
Mm-hmm.
we can see how something that works incredibly well in high stakes negotiations also works in our daily life. And I think that's one of the key principles. I think leadership is really just understanding human nature, right? And when we
Wow.
understand human nature, it doesn't just make us a better leader, it makes us a better spouse, makes us a better
Mm-hmm.
parent, makes us a better
Mm-hmm.
friend, it makes us a
Mm-hmm.
better colleague, it
Wow.
makes us a better negotiator.
Wow. What a beautiful transition, because now that leads us to our current, topic, because you do have a book coming out. And we, prior to recording this, we talked a little bit about that, or at least I said that this topic resonates with me because it's something recently that I've been going through, and what I've been telling my friends, or what I've been advising myself, is that a man has to lead himself first before he can start leading others. And it ties into what you said in like, um, before, leadership is understanding these social dynamics, and understanding how you affect these social dynamics. And that is what your new book is about. It's called Inspire: The Universal Path to And Transforming Yourself and Leading Others. Professor Adam, talk to us a little bit about that. What is this new book about? And you also have a new TED Talk that came out along with it, which is called How to Inspire Others. But first, where, I mean, you already kind of answered this, but where was the massive inspiration that came about when you wanted, or you went about writing your new book titled Inspire?
Yeah, the genesis of Inspire happened in 2006. I was teaching actually for the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I was
Wow.
teaching
Wow.
60 members of the FBI, and I was teaching them about decision making. And one of them started talking about a leader that they have was a great decision maker. And he sort of, his eyes lit up in describing this leader, and he seemed to be mesmerized by them. And he said something that really resonated with me, which he says, I'm still inspired to this day by his decision making. And I don't know why I did it that day, but I turned to the rest of the FBI agents and I said, can any of you think of a leader that inspired you? And it
Okay.
turned out all of them can. And so we started talking that day, and I started saying, well, tell me about these leaders. What was it about them that inspired you? And so
Uh-huh.
that led to a 20-year journey, nearly 20-year journey of asking people all over the world two questions. The first question was, tell me about a leader that inspired you, right? And I asked them, what I want you to do is I want you to be a scientist, essentially. I want you to pinpoint what was it about that person that inspired you?
Mm-hmm.
What was it about them that changed you inside, gave you that
Mm-hmm.
ineffable feeling of hope and possibility, warmth and light and energy? And so I've been asking people all over the world that question. Um,
Wow.
Now, I also started asking people another question. And that's because of a different FBI moment where someone said, I don't want to talk about a leader that inspired me. I want to tell you about, the son of a bitch leader that really
Mm-hmm.
infuriated me.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it turns out everyone could talk about a leader that infuriated them. So I started
Yes.
asking people all over the world two questions. Tell me about a
Mm-hmm.
leader that inspired you. Tell me about a leader that infuriated you.
Right.
So I've collected tens of thousands of these across every continent in the world. And I've basically come to three insights. The first is that the inspiring leader and the infuriating leader are mirror images of each other. right? The inspiring leader sees the big picture. The infuriating leader is like caught in the weeds, right? The inspiring leader is courageous. The infuriating leader is cowardly. The inspiring leader is generous, right? The infuriating
Right.
leader is stingy.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is that
Okay.
I can take all of these thousands and thousands of examples and I can reduce them to three core factors. So, what are the
Right.
three core factors of
Please.
inspiring leadership? The first is being visionary, right? It's how we see the world, how we communicate about the
Right.
world. The
Right.
second is being an exemplar of desired behavior, how we are in the
Mm-hmm.
world, our presence in the world. And then the
There you go.
third is how we stand in the world. And the third is being a mentor, inspiring
Wow.
mentor, which is sort of how we interact and go around in the world. And then the third insight. So the first insight is the inspiring and fearing leaders are kind of exist on a continuum as mirror images of each other. The second is that I can reduce all these to three core factors: visionary,
Mm-hmm.
exemplar, mentor. And the
Mm-hmm.
third insight is that these are universal. Every single
Beautiful.
inspiring, infuriating characteristic that is described in one country is described in every other country in the world. So
Wow.
this tells us something really about this idea that this continuum of inspiring and infuriating leaders is really embedded right in the very architecture of the human mind. It's how we see the world. We see the
Yeah.
world through this lens of inspiring and infuriation. It's really fundamental to the human condition. And I think the reason why these three
Mm-hmm.
factors, visionary,
Yes.
exemplar, and
Visionary.
mentor, are
Exemplar.
universal, is because
Mm-hmm.
each of them satisfy a fundamental human need. So
Which
being
is
visionary satisfies the fundamental human need for meaning and understanding.
wow. Of
Exemplar
course.
satisfies the fundamental human need for protection and
Mm-hmm.
energy and passion. And being a great mentor satisfies the fundamental human need to feel supported, but also to feel respected and valued and elevated. And so we have these
Wow.
three different elements that all exist on this inspiring flirting continuum because
Wow.
they relate to the core fundamental needs of what it means to be a human being.
Wow. Wow, Professor, that's probably one of the most mind blowing concepts that I've encountered on this show, and not just because I mean, we talk a lot about leadership on this show, right? We have a lot of business
Yep.
guests on here, but I don't think it's ever been delivered in such a simplified manner or in such a structured manner where why is it fundamental or what are the fundamental? You not only gave us what are the fundamentals of leadership, you also gave us why these are fundamental. And it goes back to the root of who we are as humans, who we are as people, in that we just want to be heard. We just want to be understood. We just want to find meaning in these social interactions. And again, I always like to relate this business side, leadership, organizations, negotiations. I always like to relate it to, you know, like mirror that into our real lives as well, because you mentioned all these fundamental aspects and the three factors of a visionary. You need to be an exemplar because it gives that sense of protection, like you're setting yourself up as someone to be looked up to, and mentorship. And again, these are, I love the concept. I love the concept, Professor. And this is even again a much more recent culmination of your experience in all your experience talking about all the different leadership and all the different organizations. What a journey must it have been. I want to ask this more of a personal question. How do you see yourself applying these lessons or these theories in your personal life, and how has that changed aspects of your life? And I guess I'm more curious now about your marriage, since you've mentioned your wedding, but also your kids as well. Because I always go back to like being a man, being a father. You have to take on certain roles, but at the very, very fundamental foundation of it is you have to be the leader of the family, so to speak, right? How do you apply this in real life, Professor? And I feel like it's something that our audience and listeners would love to know as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think I see a lot of my interactions with my wife and my kids, through the lens of understanding, and I think it's also recognizing. I want to just add one other point, which I think is so critical for
Oh,
understanding
please.
about this idea of the inspiring, fruiting thing, but it'll lead into sort of talking about myself as a husband and as a father, which is that you know one of the foundational elements of my model, you could call it, is that we are not born as inspiring leaders or infuriating leaders, right?
Right.
It's our
Right.
behavior is what inspires or infuriates. And
Mm-hmm.
it's very hard to stay inspiring all the time. Or I like to say, we're kind of always, knocked onto the infuriating side of the continuum through sleep deprivation or hunger or
Yes. Yes.
frustration or anxiety, whatever it is that's happening in the world. And so I think that, you know, um, one thing that I think is critical is to recognize that um, we're all going to be infuriating some of the times. And our
Right.
goal in life is how can we be more inspiring more of the time and,
Right.
infuriating less of the time. And so
Right.
I feel like, for example, I'll just, I've grown as a father tremendously. My kids are 6 and 7 now, and my own father, had so many inspiring characteristics to him, but he also had an explosive temper. And I
Okay.
think early on with my kids is uh, I was I was like him just because that's what I had learned. I would explode at something, and I quickly
Of course.
saw just the devastating impact it had on my kids. Like they would just go into like this crying state of fugue state. And so I've, I wouldn't say 100% eliminated, but I would say 96% eliminated yelling, right? And raising my voice because I could see the impact it had on them. But a lot of it was also, thinking and reflecting. And I think that's the other thing that really is also about the human condition, but also about maybe the single most important ingredient for staying on the inspiring side of the continuum is
Please.
reflecting on our own experiences and saying,
Wow.
oh, I raised my voice with my son today.
Oh, wow.
Why did I do that? You know,
Mm-hmm.
what could I have done differently? How could I
Mm-hmm.
be less infuriating the next time?
Mm-hmm.
How can I understand how it affected him? Even
Mm-hmm.
though he's 5, I could still say to them, "What do you think would have been a better response that I could have given?"
Of
And
course.
making him be part of the conversation. Um,
Right.
and so I think that I'm probably the thing that I'm most proud of in the world is that I feel like I'm a pretty good dad, and I work really hard at it. And
Wow.
part of it is recognizing all the mistakes I've made along the way, but trying to learn
Mm-hmm.
from each and every one of them.
Wow. And that's, again, it's something that resonates with me because, we all make mistakes. We all sometimes, again, like you said, we tip over to that side of the continuum. We tip over to that infuriating side, where we tip back into the inspiration side.
Yeah.
And exactly the question I was just gonna ask is like, what are on the times that we're not perfect, on the times that we make those mistakes, what is the way to react? How is what is the solution? And reflecting is of course important to that. And
Yeah, I think well, one of the I've done so many different types of scientific studies and et cetera. But
mhm,
one of the things that I've explored in my research is the difference between shame and guilt. And
there you go.
shame is not a very productive emotion. Shame often turns us into ostriches, like we just want to bury our head in the sand, and we
Yes.
want. Shame is all about avoid, avoid, avoid because it's so
Mhm,
painful. But when we feel guilt, guilt is more about reparation. It's about repairing. It's about engaging, and it's not about avoiding, but about approaching. And so, I think one of the things is that when we make mistakes, we have to think about we have to take responsibility, and we have to think about like what were the conditions that led us to make the mistake, so that we can learn from that and make that mistake less likely in the future. But we can only do that if we're in some ways brave enough to acknowledge, the mistake we made, and understand some of the consequences for it. And to do that, shame is
Wow.
particularly ineffective, I think, at
Yes.
helping us solve those things.
And you keep hitting the nail on the head, Professor, because I am going through it, and I keep telling you. But there is a very great distinction, a great lesson to learn in there of the difference between shame and guilt. Because shame is ineffective, guilt gives us an opportunity for reparations, gives us an
Yeah.
opportunity to face our problems. Professor, as we near the end of this episode, I enjoyed a little too much asking my questions to you, but I want to touch up a little bit more about your new TEDx. It's called "How to Inspire." There is one effect or one theory that you talked about there. You called it the leader amplification effect, and you used a plane analogy. And you also uses a funny story there where you basically just told your colleague, you told her, we need to talk, and everyone would lose their minds because not just, I guess, in leadership, not just in the co-working space, right, but also in life, where there's no communication and you just told, like, hey, something's up and we need to talk. And that's such a difficult emotion to deal with when the other party isn't being very clear. How do you then overcome that, right? And talk to us a little bit
Yeah,
about that,
great.
what you said,
Yeah.
leader amplification. And yeah, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, I'll start off with just defining what the leader amplification effect, which is
Yes,
basically, it
please.
says that when we're a leader, we're
Mm-hmm.
basically in the spotlight, we're on stage, there's more attention on us. When we're leaders, we're often very powerful, which means that people are more dependent on us. And
Yes.
because that attention, being in that audience, because of our power, people pay very close attention to everything we do. And as a result of that, the actions that we take have a bigger impact on us. And so, praise from a leader, right, becomes
Yes.
glorious praise.
Yes.
But criticism from a leader becomes humiliating criticism.
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
one of the most important things to recognize is that as leaders, is that we're going to have a big impact. And that's one of the things that I think about this inspiring and infuriating continuum is like, you
Mm-hmm.
don't have a choice when you're in a position of leadership where people look up to you. You're going to have an impact, and that now it's your
Mm-hmm.
choice whether the impact is inspiring them and infuriating them. And so the leader amplification effect tells us that our direct communication, like
Mm-hmm.
praising, criticizing, get amplified. But so does our silence get amplified. It becomes deafening.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
you mentioned the plane example. And then
Mm-hmm.
also what we might call ambiguous communication, the
Right.
portentousness or the possible ominousness of it gets
Yes. So
amplified. And so
ominous.
I like to tell the story. The way I tell the story of I need to talk to you is like, imagine you wake up and a friend of yours sends you a text message that says, hey, we need to talk. And you'd be like, okay, not sure what's up. I don't know if it's good.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's bad. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
it's about me. I don't know if it's about another person, and I probably worry, but just a little bit. Right. But now imagine that same text, I need to talk to you, came from your boss. Like it would literally scream off the page at you. Right. And you'd be
Absolutely.
like, what did I do wrong? You'd be
Mm-hmm.
so worried and so scared. And the difference is, right, is the fact that the difference in power and the leadership that person has, that portentousness, that ominousness gets amplified. Now, there's clear solutions that we can do. And I'll tell you
Please.
a couple solutions. So in my
Please.
case, when I said this to a doctoral student who had less power than me and freaked
Mm-hmm.
her out by saying, I need to talk to
Mm-hmm.
you, and she couldn't get any work done, and all she could think
Mm-hmm.
about was like that I need to
Mm-hmm.
talk to her. She said something really instructive. She said, never tell me you need to talk to me without
Please.
telling me why. Right.
Oh no.
So as leaders, we might think, oh, I know it's enough. Why did I want to talk to this graduate student? I just want to talk about some research materials. But
Mm-hmm.
she didn't know that. Right. And so
Mm-hmm.
one thing as a leader is always give people the why. Right. Very simple.
Right.
And, I always joke. I said to Gail, I said, hey, Gail, come by my office at 3 p.m. I need to talk to you. Or I could have said, hey, Gail, let's go over your research materials,
Yep.
come by my
Be
office at 8
clear.
p.m. It's the same
Mm-hmm.
number of words. It wouldn't have cost
Yep.
me anything to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The second thing is we can do other ways to reassure people. So a
Yes.
president of a multinational company refused to tell people why he wanted to meet with him. But he
Okay.
finally agreed to put in a colon and a closed parentheses when he said, I need to talk to you, a smiley face. So
Okay. There you go.
when he wasn't scary, he put in a smiley face. And I saw some of the people from this company later, and I said, how's it going? They're like, oh, it's great.
Okay.
Get the smiley face. But if you don't get the smiley face, you run like hell,
Ooh.
right? And figure out what's going on because you know it's a big deal. And so we can communicate more effectively by understanding that.
And you can communicate more effectively by adding emojis, basically.
Yeah. I mean, here, I'll just give you one quick example of someone gave me a woman I was teaching. She said, I recently got promoted to vice president of my company.
Uh-huh.
And I was so busy. Like I had no chance to respond to any emails all
Mm-hmm.
days. And so from like 6 to 7:30, I would respond to all the emails I got the day. Now, I didn't
Mm-hmm.
expect any member of my team to reply that night, but I'd
Mm-hmm.
send them a 6:30. By 6:45, I already got a reply. Or I'd send a note at
Right.
7 by 7:30. And I realized in their mind, I'm the boss. If they're sending an email, they are interpreting it as I have to respond now. Now you could do one of
Yes.
two things. You could tell your team members, hey, this is when I'm sending emails, but you
Right.
don't have to worry about them until tomorrow. But that's also
Right.
hard for people to do, right? You get an email
Mm-hmm.
from your boss, you're going to be tempted to read it, right? And so what she started to do was something even better. She just scheduled all of her nighttime emails to go out the next day at 8:30 in the morning. So
Oh, there
that
you
no
go.
one, so she wrote them when it was convenient for her to write them, but she
Right.
delivered them when it was convenient for them to read it.
Wow. And I like I always do, I want to mirror this into real life situations, right? Because now we're seeing this social dynamic in teams and in your university, academes. I'm imagining like with relationship, with marriages, you can't be go like we need to talk, right? And that's just like so ominous, right? But it could also be a message as simple as I feel paralyzed, and you go into the state of panic. What kind of paralysis is this? What is this talking about? But also, there's example that you said that putting it out there that's not just convenient for her, but also convenient for the recipients of that email. How do you see? I guess we kind of can start wrapping up on this kind of question. Is like, how do you see your work in leadership, in inspiration right now, moving into the future? And do you see yourself kind of like more touching on the realm of real life and social dynamics and social psychology in relationships outside organizations?
Yeah, I don't know if my research is going to go in that direction per se, but I think my research has implications and
Yes.
practical applications for that. And
Yes.
as one way I like to say it is that you know, I did a couple series of presentations, and a CEO of a company relayed to me later that what he had learned in my class made him a better spouse, right? And a
Wow.
Fortune 500 board member told me that what they learned in my class made them a more supportive parent, right? And so I
Wow.
think that the principles I said something to you, I think is the single most important thing I said is that leadership is really understanding human nature, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
as humans, we have fundamental needs, which is where the
Hmm.
inspiring and fearing continuum comes from. We're also organized in social but also hierarchical ways, so it's really important to understand social hierarchy and the many different dynamics that exist within it. And that's why I spent 20 years studying power and status and co-leadership, and
Yes.
other elements. Co-leadership is a particularly interesting one because it's as parents we're co-leaders, right? And
Pretty
so
much.
when
Yes.
you're doing
Yes.
co-leadership in organizations, you can apply the dynamics directly to, well, who are the co-leaders of a family unit? It's the parents.
Hmm. I, Professor Adam, it has been a very enlightening time, a very enlightening episode. Um, I would like to, first off, give you this opportunity. Talk to us a little bit about your book. When is it, the new book? When is it coming out? Where can we
Yep.
expect it? and our audience and listeners would love to know.
No. Well, it literally went into production today. So I turned in the final copy yesterday, and which is also why my voice is a little hoarse because I didn't get a lot of sleep in the last few weeks. But it's going to come out next January 2025.
Wow. Fantastic. Okay. I would like to also give you this opportunity. Where can we connect with you? Where can we stay updated on all your works? And, maybe find your other book as well and stay updated in when this new book is coming out.
It's a good question. I need to up my LinkedIn game. But I think just look for the name Adam Galinsky. My research, for example, I've done some research on what I coined a phrase with a colleague of mine called enclothed cognition, and that research was featured in The Economist last week, for example.
Right, fantastic. And to all our audience and listeners as well, first off, go check out the first TED Talk video of Professor Adam, How to Speak Up for Yourself. I'm going to go up and check that out right after this interview, but also his new TED Talk video as well that just went out, talking about inspiration and talking about the topics and the leadership that we have here today, which is called How to Inspire. Professor, it has been great. I as much as I want to keep asking you questions because I'm learning so much and it's resonating with what I'm going through with life right now, I would like to ask you one last thing. Anything else that you would like to tell and share the audience and listeners to bring this home?
Yeah, I think that this is what I believe it to be a fundamental truth, is that every single one of us has the capacity to be inspiring. It's about understanding that there is a scientific set of attributes that make up what it means to be inspiring, and that we can know those, and then we can nurture those, and we can develop those, and then we increase the amount of time that we're going to be on the inspiring side of the continuum. And when we do that, we're going to make the world a better place to be.
And yes, and like you said, no one is born an inspirational leader. No one is born an infuriating leader. But like you just said that now, we can nurture that aspect of ours to be more of an inspiring leader, not just for our team, not just for our organizations, not just for our family, but of course, starting with ourselves. Professor Adam, Absolutely. It has been an honor. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you for being on the show. And to our audience and listeners out there, see you on the next one.
All right, so here's the thing. We try to get a little bit better every day, but we can't do it without you. So if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe below. And if you have any comments, just leave them in the space under.